Hello and welcome to this daily video. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Israeli strikes on Iran that occurred overnight between the 12th and 13th of June. The Israelis have come out and announced that this operation is called Rising Lion, intended to strike both Iran's nuclear capabilities and some of its missile and air defense capabilities. The Israelis were kind enough to release an animation showing us exactly what they were doing, and let's look at it for a second together. So they're showing the Iranian air defense systems that were targeted. However, this isn't everything that they struck. It seems that the Israelis had deployed drones within Iran itself, and they used these drones to strike at Iranian radars as well as senior Iranian officials, including the head of the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. This is the regime protection unit and the power projection unit of Iran, as well as the Iranian military itself. The aim is to disable the capability of Iran to threaten Israel, both in terms of its nuclear weapons and its ballistic missiles. And so we've seen the Tabriz and Natanz nuclear facilities being attacked. These are not the only nuclear assets that the Iranians have. We expect the Israelis to continue attacking, and indeed they've said that this is going to be a 2-week operation. The Iranians, for their part, have begun their retaliation against this attack. They, as of the time of this recording, had fired upwards of 200 drones towards Israel, and we are seeing countries in the region like Jordan participate in the air defense operation on behalf of Israel that's intended to make sure that Iran's retaliation gets dulled. The Americans have taken the position that this was an action that they did not authorize, that this was an action that they didn't necessarily approve of. They're calling it unilateral, and they're saying, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, we are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Now, the Americans are deployed all over the countries that neighbor Iran. They're present in the UAE with naval bases and an air base, in Qatar with a massive air base, in Oman with naval infrastructure and air bases, and in Kuwait. The Arab countries have come out and said that they strongly object to this attack. They've condemned it. They said they don't want it. And probably this is actually genuine. Much as Iran is a threat to them, right now, with the fall of the Syrian government, the Arab states view Turkey as an even bigger threat because Turkey is emerging as a regional hegemon that can replace Iran and potentially one day challenge Israel, and it will always have aspirations to take control of the holy places in Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina, the holy places according to Islam, in order to bill itself as the leader of the Muslim world. Essentially, what's happened is that the Americans, whether they want to do or not, got dragged into another Middle Eastern war, which brings up the question of who's actually sovereign here? Because the position of Donald Trump was that he didn't want any new wars in the Middle East, that he didn't want to get dragged into new conflicts. His focus was on China. This is why he was trying to sort out the Ukraine war. This is why he was saying that he wanted to negotiate a new nuclear agreement with the Iranians. And now, all of a sudden, there's a new war in the region, and this can take months to resolve. The problem that the Iranians are facing is this. It seems that the Israelis have exceptional intelligence on pretty much everything in Iran. So, as I mentioned, we saw very senior commanders of the Iranian armed forces and the IRGC getting killed. We saw nuclear scientists getting killed. The top Iranian official in charge of negotiating with the United States, Ali Shamkhani, he too got killed, meaning that the Israelis have sort of ended the prospect of negotiations with the Iranians and between the Iranians and the Americans. And the Iranians don't know where this intelligence penetration comes from. They don't know who's compromised and who isn't. And they saw the same playbook being used by the Israelis against their proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. In Lebanon, over the course of the war with Israel, what had happened was that Hezbollah and Israel had reached an agreement to end the war with the leader of Hezbollah at the time, Hassan Nasrallah. Then he got whacked by the Israelis, and pretty much the entire military command of Hezbollah was eliminated, with senior commanders trying to meet in order to plan their response. And every time they met, the Israelis knew where they were and managed to hunt them down. So it seems that this is the playbook that the Israelis are going to use against the Iranians this time. And the Iranians don't know how to plug the gaps in their intelligence and don't know how to deal with the reality that they have no idea who can be trusted and who can't be trusted. This makes it very hard for the Iranians to make any decisions and to understand how they're going to retaliate. If every time they try to meet and discuss what are we going to do now, a bunch of their top officials and decision makers get killed, that's no way to actually run a war. And this is the massive advantage that the Israelis have. They seem to know where senior Iranian officials are, and they seem to be able to hunt them down. There's going to be a question as to how long does this last? Do the Israelis show that they can do this in an unlimited way for the next 2 or 3 weeks? We've seen the Iranians appoint new commanders to replace the ones that were killed. Obviously, finding new nuclear scientists is a little bit harder. But if these new commanders starts getting plowed through, as happened against Hezbollah in Lebanon, it's going to be a real problem for Iran to figure out how to retaliate. Previously, the Iranians had sort of two nuclear options, one economic, one literal. The economic nuclear option would have been to try to shut down the export of oil in the Persian Gulf. Around 17 million barrels per day of oil pass through there. That's around maybe a quarter of global supply that comes from that region on a daily basis. If this was to be shut down by the Iranians, obviously the consequences for Western economies and for the Chinese economy would be extremely dire. You'd see oil prices rising uncontrollably. You'd see inflation rising. You'd see a full-on financial crisis if something like that were to happen. The way things are going, however, with all of the Gulf states saying that we aren't involved and the American bases in the region not actually participating in the bombing, it's kind of hard for the Iranians to justify going after this economic nuclear option that they have. They might do it anyway. At the end of the day, you have to understand how Iranian ideology works. From the Iranian perspective, the peak of history was the supposed martyrdom of Imam Hussein, who is the grandson of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, who was killed while trying to restore righteousness to the Islamic Ummah, to the Islamic polity, nation, whatever you want to call it. And he was murdered by his rivals. And this is seen as the example of martyrdom that Shia Muslims should be following. So if they get it to their heads that they're going to follow a theological line of reasoning, you would see the Iranians escalate in all kinds of ways that wouldn't seem rational to us as external observers, but they would be in line with their religious beliefs. The second nuclear option that the Iranians have is actually to go ahead and build a nuclear weapon. Now, two of their biggest uranium enrichment facilities have already been hit. There's a supposed secret third one. We don't know if it's operational, and we don't know how much damage the facilities themselves actually incurred. You have to remember that Iranian military planning is predicated on the idea that they are inferior when it comes to air capabilities and air defense. They accept that this weakness is something that they're stuck with. And so what they've done was disperse both their nuclear and their missile program and base it under Iran's rather large, rather enormous mountain chains, with a concentration of the missile bases on the western side of the country that is closest to Israel. But if you wanted to build a nuclear weapon, it's very difficult to do it when the facilities themselves are getting attacked, when you don't know how much damage they've taken, when that damage can be updated, shall we say, on an hourly or daily basis, and where you have no idea how much Israeli intelligence already knows about your actions and your plans. So the Iranians are in a little bit of a bind here. The other problem that they have is the Iranian rial, the Iranian currency. It has been collapsing in recent months. It recovered somewhat, but now with a war and with the threat of this war turning regional and the Americans trying to impose an embargo on Iran to stop it from being able to import basic goods and export oil, this can get considerably worse for the Iranian government. Add to that the fact that this government in Iran isn't particularly popular. Islamic governments face a problem. When they try to impose Islam too severely, as the Iranians do, it very often backfires. People don't like to be told what to think all the time, and yet the Iranian government does that pretty much incessantly, imposing the hijab, imposing religious norms, which a lot of Iranians don't accept. A lot of Iranians embrace this, to be fair. The regime does have a certain degree of support and popularity, and it has a hardcore base that is truly committed. But for the majority of people, as in most places, they just want to live and take care of their families. So this isn't a particularly popular regime. Indeed, the Israelis risk making that regime even more popular by showing it as the victim of external aggression. But for the Iranians, neither blockading the Strait of Hormuz and trying to explode energy prices, nor trying to build a nuclear device at this stage are particularly appealing options. And surrender is also not an option, because the problem that they face is that for 40 years, since 1979 and the success of the Islamic Revolution, the narrative that they've sold the public is that this Islamic Revolution is there to lead the Muslim world. It's going to fight to liberate Palestine and get rid of the Jewish state and terminate it. And this will be a successful strategy, and the Islamic Revolution will be exported to the rest of the Muslim world. This seemed like a somewhat tenable premise when the Iranians were in control of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And it looked like they were succeeding in surrounding Israel with missile bases and with threatening a general war against the Israelis. But we saw last year that the linchpin of this project, Syria, fell, and the Syrian government of former President Bashar al-Assad was overthrown. Now we have new Sunni rule that is hostile to Iran and allied to Turkey. So the Islamic Revolution as a whole failed, especially with the humiliating beating that Hezbollah in Lebanon received, the unwillingness of Iraqi militias to rise to the occasion against the United States, and the fact that it's just Yemen now that's sort of attacking Israel, but these attacks are not that impressive or successful. So the idea of the Islamic Revolution has failed. And in a way, making peace is more destabilizing now for the Islamic Revolution, because the tenets of the Islamic Revolution are that it is fighting the great Satan, the United States, and the little Satan, Israel. And if Iran has failed against Israel and lost its claws in Lebanon and Syria, and it's making compromises with the United States after being struck by Israel, then why is there an Islamic revolutionary regime in the first place? It forces the question of, what are you guys doing and what's the point of you being in power? The reality is that the Islamic Revolution has failed to deliver its promises to the people of Iran. And the defeats that it has received at the hands of Israel and the United States have been quite spectacular. So this is now an extremely unstable and weak regime, and it's stuck. If it escalates, it ends up getting hit by the Americans left and right. The Israelis have pretty much neutralized the Iranian air defense, meaning that Iranian manufacturing, energy, industry, weapons infrastructure, etc., can constantly be hit with airstrikes, and meaning that Iranian ports can be blockaded, essentially. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us pretty much watching to see how the Iranians try to get out of the bind that they're in. If they try to escalate their way out of this, it's a pretty much disastrous option. If they try to play for time, which is what Hezbollah and Lebanon did, which is what the Iranian strategic thinking on a war with Israel involves, that is a very hard thing to do with very inadequate air defense, and with the Israelis having the option of striking infrastructure, industry, ports, all of the things that are needed for a state to function. Now the question arises, well, how did the Israelis penetrate the Iranians so deeply? How did they collect all of this intelligence against Hezbollah and Iran? I think part of the answer is that a chunk of the Iranian leadership has decided that the only way forward for Iran is as a nation state. And for that to happen, and for Iran to be a normal nation state, then the revolution has to be gotten rid of. And it would therefore make sense for these guys to feed intelligence on their domestic enemies within Iran to try to help Israel along. What happened with Hezbollah was pretty spectacular. Everybody of significance there, all of the true hardliners, got killed. And what's left are second-rate hardliners and a lot of incompetence. So I'm wondering if a part of the Iranian establishment does want to rid itself of the Islamic Revolution, given that the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, who's been in power since 1989, he's now 85, and he doesn't have a clear successor because he was grooming the former president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, to succeed him. And then that guy died in a helicopter crash, assassination, we have no idea. But there's no succession plan. There's nobody to replace Khamenei. And so it sort of makes sense for there to be this betrayal. The other option is that a bunch of Iranian dissidents that have always hated the Islamic Revolution are feeding Israel information, and this information is available, and that's what's happening. That doesn't explain how Hezbollah was penetrated. It doesn't explain what kind of information Israel had on those guys. But the Iranians are extremely stuck. They're in a bad position. Domestically, they failed. A big chunk of the population is either not committed to them or actively hates them. A small chunk, and an important part, is still deeply committed, but they are by no means a majority. However, they are the committed minority, and the committed minority often beats the majority. And now the Iranians don't have very many options. What they're going to at least try to do is keep firing missiles at Israel from these mountain bases for as long as they possibly can. But this isn't a particularly great strategy. If the Israelis have the US Air Force defending them, and all of the regional allies in the Middle East, the Sunni Arab states, the same ones that condemned Israel's attack, if these guys are also actively helping defend Israel, as well as Israel's own rather impressive missile defense capabilities, that's not a very viable strategy, because these underground bases are not protected by any kind of air defense anymore. We've seen the Israelis knock that out. And the longer they fire, the more they are going to get exposed to American and Israeli radars and drones and other surveillance systems. And every time they pop up their heads, there's going to be a strike against these bases that slows them down and disables them. So if they try to play for a long game, they can fire missiles for an extended period of time, but that happens while the Iranian economy is collapsing. And that happens while every bit of infrastructure in Iran gets destroyed. So what do? Do they end up attacking everybody around them in the region in sort of wanting to go down in a giant blaze of glory? It's not a viable strategy either. That only accelerates their demise. At some point, what I expect is for the Israelis to go ahead and start assassinating the senior clerical leadership of Iran, including the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. When that happens, there's going to be a big fight within Iran over who succeeds him and what kind of process is followed to succeed him. Who decides? Do they end up forming a committee, as the Iranian constitution allows for? Do they elect a new supreme leader and accept that he might not have a grip on power and might not have the right gravitas or capabilities in order to be able to either make a deal with the Americans or control the armed forces and keep them going? This is a country with an impressive defense industrial base, but nothing matters if you don't have air defense. If you can't defend that industrial base, and if you can't intercept the enemy's attacks, not much matters. And if all the while you're worried about human intelligence penetration and Israeli intelligence having a very good mapping of what you're doing at any moment in time, that's not going to get you very far. And that's really isn't going to get you very far. So we have to ask now, what do the Russians do, and what do the Iranians do, and what do the Chinese do? I'm sorry. The Russians don't want Iran falling apart, because what that does is that it strengthens Pakistan and it strengthens Turkey, and obviously it strengthens the United States. They want Iran to continue to function, but they have their own needs for air defense, and setting up a full defense infrastructure in the middle of a war is not that easy. They have an open line to Iran through the Caspian. They can transfer to Iran whatever it needs. They can supply it with equipment, but they also need that equipment for the Ukraine war that they're fighting, where the Ukrainians are striking Russia more and more in depth. So will they do it? Won't they do it? I think they want to prop up Iran, but they also don't want to end up sponsoring Iran as a proxy while they're having to fight a pretty difficult war in Ukraine. This leaves the Chinese. The Chinese have other priorities, including figuring out a way to keep their economy going by trading with the United States. For all the talk that we hear about China's growing consumer market, it still relies very much on exports, and the most profitable place to export to is the United States. Do they decide that they're going to try to take Taiwan because the United States is distracted? That means that they can't spare a lot of weapons to give the Iranians. And if they decide that they're going to support Iran and try to build up air defense first around the Iranian capital, Tehran, and then expanding towards the west of the country in order to make sure that the Iranians are in a better position and they can keep firing at Israel, that gets expensive. And if the Americans decide to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, that's pretty much a massive economic disaster for the whole world. We are seeing some pretty unpalatable choices faced by all of the decision makers. China and Russia don't want Iran to fall apart, but their ability to help it isn't great either. Unless the Chinese decide we don't care about the economic consequences, this is a war for survival, If the Americans win in the Middle East, then the Chinese are pretty much severely weakened, and the Americans can focus a lot of forces against China itself. These are the options that they face, and none of these options is particularly good. China has come out and condemned this attack. We'll see how much they follow it up. But the key issue is going to be how quickly can the Israelis slice through the Iranian leadership. The more senior Iranian leaders are killed quickly, the less options the Iranians have, and therefore the less ability the allies of Iran, China and Russia, have to support Iran. So this is a little bit of a strategic game changer. It's not a little bit of a strategic game changer. It's a very big strategic game changer. The Americans have pretty much decided that they're willing to fight for the Middle East. This has happened in spite of President Donald Trump, not because of him. He was saying he wanted diplomacy, he wanted peace, but the Pentagon ended up supporting Israel conducting this attack anyway. So kind of shows you where the power really lies in the United States, and the extent to which democracy is compromised. But this is, as I was saying, a strategic game changer. The Americans are saying that the Middle East is fully our sphere of influence, and we won't allow Iran or anybody else to threaten it. What this means in practical terms is that Russia is a lot more vulnerable because the friendly regime that it had in Iran is now gone. It means that Turkey is a lot stronger because its main regional rival, aside from Israel, is going to be severely weakened. It means that China is weaker because Iran is, it doesn't have a viable pathway to winning this, frankly. And that means that, there's a limit on Chinese influence in the Middle East. It can buy all the oil that it wants, but it can't be a strategic partner. And it puts Western governments and Western actual decision makers, as opposed to elected leaders, in a stronger position. But then, if Iran is severely destabilized and this whole region becomes chaotic, there's going to be massive migrant flows. And a lot of people are going to try to reach Europe. And that is going to affect Europe quite significantly. Indeed, the longer this war goes on, the more we expect to see Iran's supporters. Indeed, the longer this war goes on, the more we expect to see Iran's supporters in places like Berlin, London, Stockholm, Paris, beginning to protest and joining the pro-Palestine protests that are already ongoing, if they haven't done so already. And the more we expect to see these protests turning violent. Is there going to be a reaction from European societies or from European governments? And how will they handle that? So this war is beneficial to the intelligence and military leadership that is actually the final arbiter of what happens in the West, but it's not particularly beneficial to Western peoples, especially if we start seeing massive flows of migrants going from Iran and Iraq into Turkey. The other thing to think about is what happens in Iraq itself. This is a broken country. Turkey has just become much stronger. Do the Turks decide that they're going to make their move and try to consolidate over northern Iraq and use the energy of northern Iraq in order to become a great power? Turkey is obviously a threat to the West as a Muslim nation with ambitions to recreate the Ottoman Empire that once tried to invade Vienna and that once controlled much of the Balkans and of the Black Sea and of even Crimea and parts of Ukraine. This is going to be a problem. This is going to be another area of conflict. And again, it's not exactly good news if you are in Europe. a very unstable Middle East that favors either radical regime in Iran or in Turkey is fundamentally bad news in Europe. And the weakening of Iran is good news for Turkey. So this is a war that's going to have pretty severe implications. And it's really going to change not just the Middle East, but global geopolitics. If you're interested in these kinds of topics, I have a new show coming out called Realpolitik. It launches next week here on the Lotus Eaters. I invite you to watch it. Do please let me know what kind of topics you want me to cover, what questions you have, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.